Hi, and welcome to MexElects. Today we're doing something a little different. We're going out to a housing project called Ciudad Yagul, and perhaps some other of these communities where throughout the 2000s the Mexican government created a public-private partnership in order to ostensibly provide housing for very low-income Mexicans. In the end, this turned out to be something of a major disaster. The construction companies were given an endless flow of cheap mortgages and built, as we will see, some pretty substandard housing in areas where they could find cheap land, but with very little in the way of services, everything from water to garbage to security. In the end, many of these mortgages turned out to be of the kind that proved to be such a disaster in the U.S. After the financial crash in 2008, so-called subprime mortgages with escalating interest rates. Many people fell into arrears because the monthly payments were so high. Ultimately, thousands and thousands of people had their properties foreclosed, ultimately abandoned, with all of the attendant problems that brings in terms of abandoned houses, criminal gangs taking over the properties, so on and so forth. So there's a lot to cover today, but I think you're going to find it pretty interesting.
These are kind of housing developments where profit was put first. So they bought cheap pieces of land, which are not in any municipality at all, kind of with questionable legal procedures, and then all of a sudden these very small towns out here all of a sudden would have to handle this huge flux of people and having to provide services and whatnot. No? Now, supposedly these construction companies were supposed to provide these services, but in many cases they haven't. Okay, we're here in Ciudad Yagul in Tlacolula. We're going to take a look at some of these places. Mind you, these buildings are only maybe 10 years old, and they look about as decrepit as if they're 50 years old. Vamos a ir entrando. Enrique, la cosa que más asombra aquí es que estas son las casas que apenas tienen 10 años. ¿Cómo es que ha habido un deterioro tan rápido en algo que es tan reciente? Mira todo eso, ¿no? Y hemos visto muchas de esas casas así.
Bueno, tiene mucho que ver con que muchos de los propietarios no las abandonaron al no poder continuar pagándolas. Es decir, de entrada, el motor original que animó este modelo durante el sexenio de Fox era poder dotar de vivienda económica a segmentos de la población que tenían bajos ingresos, pero también se llegó al extremo de otorgar créditos a personas que eran calificadas de riesgosas, en el sentido de que no tenían un ingreso fijo, ¿no? Y sin embargo, la deuda continuaba creciendo. Muchas de las consultoras que los propios grupos de deudores han contratado han señalado que llegaban, en un crédito de 30 años, llegaban a pagar 7 veces el valor de la vivienda, ¿no?
So what Enrique is saying is that a similar situation to the subprime crisis in the United States, some of the workers had their Infonavit federal housing credit. Those who didn't qualify were given subprime loans through the construction companies themselves. Both kinds of loans, it would keep going up month by month by month, supposedly to protect foreign investors from inflation and currency conversion, basically to hedge them against risk. But these people started with a payment which would keep going up monthly that they couldn't keep up with.
Yeah. They used to call them rack rents in the 18th century, right? To basically dispossess people. I mean, you know, there's no way that any kind of ordinary person with a salary that likely is remaining pretty stagnant could suddenly be able to make these escalating mortgage payments.
And we're talking about, having to pay up to 7 times the original value of these houses at one point. Entonces, un factor, Enrique, es eso de las hipotecas subprime o las hipotecas
Sí, claro.
de alto riesgo, ¿no?
Sí,
¿Qué más hay en juego aquí?
Yo creo que también en el tema de que, justamente como hemos comentado, al final es difuso quién es el nivel de autoridad que tiene que otorgar los niveles, ¿no? Es decir, también de repente para el usuario final es difícil identificar a quién le puede exigir o que se le dote de transporte, de seguridad, y muchas de las viviendas, o sea, el espacio de la vivienda es más allá que las paredes, ¿no? La vivienda tiene por necesidad que tener servicios, conectividad y seguridad. Y como vemos acá, por ejemplo, hay espacios muy grandes de viviendas que no están siendo habitadas y que empiezan a degradarse porque, como se ve, se roban los muebles de baño, las puertas, los insumos. Y eso afecta la calidad de la vivienda del conjunto en su entorno total, ¿no?
So what Enrique is saying is that the idea of housing is a lot more than just 4 walls. It has to do with services. It has to do with water, electricity, connectivity, transportation, some kind of sense of community. And none of that was really thought about. These were just put in, slapped down, and in a lot of cases, the construction companies simply abandoned them as they are. So these are, besides the problem with the mortgages, you have houses that don't have the basic services and are very far away from where people have to go to work. And I think the worst thing, Colin, that we should also comment is this isn't just like, oh, well, the Mexican housing problem. This is something that was deliberately fomented by international finance.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, this is the capitalist solution to housing for low-income workers. And this is the result. The World Bank was involved. Major American Wall Street banks like Citibank, Wells Fargo, all the same institutions that were responsible for the subprime crisis in the U.S., like the vultures that they are, and there's no other way of describing them. They swooped in, saw an opportunity in Mexico, in a public-private arrangement that we talked about earlier with the Mexican state, and this is the result, less than 10 years later.
And it's actually even worse than the American subprime crisis because there was at least kind of the basic limits, like a lifetime cap on interest rates. Here, there was none of that.
Right.
It was even worse than the subprime. There was no limit as to what these people were expected to pay for this. So in 2013, the federal government kind of started to put order in this, and they passed the National Housing Law. And this began to kind of regulate what had been before pretty much a Wild West housing market, build where you can, how you want, wherever you want. And so a lot of these construction companies were left with large tracts of land that they bought on the cheap that they could no longer build on, or all of a sudden that there were environmental regulations involved, or zoning regulations that put a stop to this. And so it left a lot of these projects kind of half done or incomplete. So there's a bunch of factors here. There was the 2013 law that we mentioned. There was also a change in government housing policy that began to favor high-rise or more dense urban construction, and also began to encourage people to live in previously constructed dwellings. So this kind of early 2000s boom of these kind of fraccionamientos began to dry up, and a bunch of these companies, including Homex, including Casas Geos, with all of that international financing, the international investors pulled out, they got their profit, and a lot of these companies wound up bankrupt. Okay, we're here with 2 residents of the San Domingo Barrio Bajo housing development near the town of Etla, Esmeralda, Aragon, and Tabalastra. Tell us, what are some of the problems that you've had living here?
Well, many of the problems that we have are problems that we have every day. Amongst them is that there's no water. There's a total shortage of water, so you have to buy water from water trucks. You don't have drinkable water in your homes. No. Not a single drop of water comes. You have to buy it from water trucks. And, that's every week or depending on how many people you have living in your house. Another one of the problems that we have is that it isn't paved. The roads aren't paved. So when it rains, you get huge potholes in the roads, and the cars get zoomed by as if it were a highway. And then when it doesn't rain, all the dust comes up, and then that just covers the poor neighbor's clothes that they just tried to hang out, or people who try to sell food or drink. So this is about 15 years, and they're old, and there are still roads that aren't paved. I don't know exactly how old it is, about that, 15, 20 years old. But it's got very serious deficiencies. Wasn't it the responsibility of the construction company to pave the roads? Well, I think at the beginning they were kind of paved. You can kind of see what's left of the asphalt that was left, but that was a long time ago. So they haven't been maintained. So only when the neighbors pool some money and they just come in to smooth down the roads. But that's about, with the water trucks coming by day after day, the roads get very damaged. So we have to just be able to kind of flatten down the road so that it's kind of passable. We've also seen that there are a lot of abandoned houses. That really must create a safety problem if there are a lot of houses that aren't being used. Yes, absolutely. Most people who own the homes here, what they try to do is rent them and then go live in the city. So this creates safety problems. One of the problems here is, that there are houses with broken windows, the doors have been forced in, people who go into the houses, and we also realize that that's why people try to build gates or, try to do their own kind of homemade security measures, put a garage in front if they can. This is a way to how each resident tries to protect themselves from the safety problem. There used to be a guard at the front, with a little gate that would, you'd rise and you'd say, "Hi, how are you doing?" That doesn't exist anymore. There's no way to pay the security guard, so that's abandoned. So that has to do with what people are able to pay here. And there's no lighting either. There's no street lighting. So the only light is what people hang out from their homes. But that's it. Wait a minute. So there's no public lighting here. If you go out at night, it's totally dark. Yep. It's totally dark. You have to go out sneaking out. And so you go out with your little... We're here still in the Santo Domingo Barrio Bajo housing development with Jose Luis Monterromero, who's another one of the neighbors here. Thanks for talking to us. So I understand that the name of the construction company was Premin, who built this housing development. And we've seen a bunch of other Premin housing developments. Same problems. What would you say to the company if they were listening to this interview? Well, it makes me very curious because when they bought the land to build, somebody sold the land to them. It was part of the people who were in charge of the municipal government at that time, the mayor of Santo Domingo Barrio Bajo. Then the construction company said they were bankrupt, and they left us with all these problems. So it's a total case of irresponsibility on the part of both the construction company and the town who sold the land, because they sold the land, it's their land, and now they say they don't recognize us as part of the town. And it's not just with this housing development, but with a lot of them that they've built in Oaxaca. And then they're going to go to other towns and cities and do the same thing. So Premin is a very irresponsible company, not to be trusted. We also see that it's very tight here, the space. They didn't build these houses thinking about that a family might be able to live there. It's very tight. Yeah. Just that there are just three of us here, my wife, me, and my son. It's hard for us. And it surprises me that there are houses here with, they have all of their extended family here, even grandchildren.
y la nuera o el
And
yerno,
so
¿no? Entonces, pues yo ya veo que
sometimes there
son
are 5,
5,
6,
6 o
even
hasta
7 people
7.
living here.
Y digo, no
And
sé
I don't know how they do
cómo
it.
le hagan, ¿no? Porque
You know, it's
pues
just
un
one little
baño, las recámaras
bathroom.
chicas
The
y
bedroom
el
is
espacio de sala
small.
comedor,
This
pues
kind of living area
apenas
is
cada uno,
tiny.
¿no? Entonces, si somos 5 o
So with
6
5
de
or 6
familia,
people, it would
pues
be
ya
really
está complicado.
complicated
Ahora, si
to be able
viene
to
un
live. And if you
invitado,
have a
pues mejor
guest,
vamos
well,
allá
you might
afuera
as well just go
porque
outside because you
no es
can't even
posible,
receive them
¿no?
inside.
Este es un fraccionamiento también que ya tiene bastante
This
tiempo.
is
Es uno
one
de
of the
los
housing
que está un
developments
poco mejor
that's been here for quite a
cuidado,
while.
digamos,
It's
por
one of the
los
ones
vecinos.
that's kind of
Pero
better
también
taken
tiene
care
muchas
of
deficiencias, por ejemplo, que no
by the
existe el
neighbors,
drenaje.
but also has some
No
very
existe el
serious
drenaje y
deficiencies.
todo
For
lo
example,
que
there's no
las aguas
drainage.
negras
So there's no
residuos que
drainage.
salen de este
So a lot of
fraccionamiento van a
all
parar a
the
la
kind of
carretera
black water
que
from
da
this
a la
housing
a
development
Etla.
is dropped out through a pipe out into the street, the
Entonces,
highway
los
that goes
vecinos
towards Etla.
de alguna manera también tratan de hacer
So
sus propias
the
rejas, sus
neighbors
propios candados
also
de
try to make
seguridad,
their
porque
own
también se ven
gates and
robos por la noche.
rails because of the safety problem, because there are lots of robberies in the night. There's no street lighting
Procuran hacer por
in the
bloques
housing development.
un pequeño
So
fraccionamiento
they
dentro del
try
mismo
to group
fraccionamiento
together
de San Miguel.
and
Ya
create
sabe
kind of
dónde
like a
está
housing
barato.
development within the
Nada
housing
más que no va a
development.
tener ni agua,
This
ni
is
luz y
the Catano housing development. The neighbors have to put even
los vecinos
a
tienen
very
que
basic gate to
poner
try
alguna
to
bardita, aunque sea de
have
lámina,
some
para-
semblance of safety here.
para la seguridad.
Generally, we're seeing that the kind of the
Por lo general
one-story
estamos viendo que
houses
las que
are the
están
ones
más
that are the most
abandonadas son
abandoned,
las casas de modelo de
and the
una
ones that
sola
nobody
planta.
wants. Because I mean, if they can't even fit in the two-story ones, why would they? Why would they be able
Porque, pues, si no
to?
caben
Why would
en
they want a
donde tienen
one-story
dos
one?
pisos,
There's no
pues, es
shade,
menos,
there's
¿no?
no trees because
No
there's
hay
no water
sombras, no hay
to water the
árboles,
trees, so
por
that
lo
people
mismo
can't
de que
have
no
the
hay
luxury of having
agua.
plants and trees that they can't water. There are no public spaces. There's no little park where the children can play. The construction company didn't put those in. There's no place where people can just sit outside. We also see that moto taxis are very used because this housing development is quite far away from the closest town, Etla, where they can go and buy their provisions.
Cuesta más trabajo. Para algunas personas
Out
que no
here,
cuentan con
there's
la
a kind of a very grim outer wall.
tiene una fachada alta,
It makes the whole housing development look like a
una
prison.
barda que hace verla del todo tenebroso, como si fuera una cárcel.